Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. Tonight we explore a friendship pushed to the brink, a relationship that has weathered countless storms but now faces its most daunting challenge yet. The US-Canada partnership, now a battleground of economic conflict, where every decision reverberates across both nations. In the summer of 2025, a trade dispute erupted, transforming the world's longest undefended border into a front line, a symbol of growing tensions. It started with a shock declaration from Washington, a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian goods, justified by a supposed national security crisis, sending shockwaves through the global economy. Ottawa, under new Prime Minister Mark Carney, struck back with a bold counteroffensive, signaling a new era of self-reliance and determination. This isn't just about tariffs, it's about sovereignty, identity, and the unraveling of a century-old alliance, a bond that many thought unbreakable. The effects ripple from Ontario's factories to New York's boardrooms, creating uncertainty and fear in industries that rely on cross-border trade, hitting workers, businesses, and families who now face an uncertain future. The US-Canada-Mexico agreement is under threat, and the very fabric of North American trade is being rewoven, with new rules and new realities. We'll trace the timeline, the decisions, and the real-world impact of this economic rupture, examining how it all unfolded. How did two close allies become locked in a high-stakes trade war? What were the key moments that led to this crisis? Let's unpack the crisis that's reshaping the continent, and explore what the future holds for these two nations. For decades, the US and Canada shared one of the world's most integrated economic relationships, built on free trade agreements like NAFTA, and later the USMCA. Trillions in goods crossed the border annually, fueling industries and creating jobs on both sides. The auto sector epitomized this integration, with parts and vehicles crossing the border multiple times before completion. Disputes over lumber, dairy, or digital taxes were usually managed through established mechanisms, but the rise of protectionism, especially under President Trump, began to erode this stability. Tariffs justified by national security and escalating rhetoric set the stage for today's crisis. The era of seamless North American trade was ending, replaced by volatility and uncertainty. On July 11, 2025, President Trump stunned the world, a 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, citing fentanyl trafficking and a growing trade deficit. The data didn't back up the claims. Most fentanyl enters from the South, not Canada. Markets plunged, and the move blindsided both governments and industries. This wasn't the first blow. Earlier, US tariffs had already hammered Canadian steel, aluminum, and autos. By mid-2025, Canadian steel production had dropped 30%, and supply chains were in chaos. The White House aimed to force Canada into sector-specific deals, dismantling decades of integration. Every corner of the Canadian economy felt the pressure. The message was clear: America first, even at the cost of a century-old alliance. The rules of North American trade had been upended overnight. Canada didn't back down. Instead, the country stood firm, determined to chart its own course in the face of mounting international pressure and economic uncertainty. Prime Minister Carney responded with the Buy Canadian policy, a sweeping mandate for all government procurement to prioritize domestic suppliers. This was more than just a slogan. It was a bold, strategic move to protect Canadian jobs and industries from the ripple effects of US protectionism. $70 billion in public spending was redirected to Canadian businesses, aiming to shield the economy and foster self-reliance. The hope was to spark a wave of innovation and investment, keeping factories running and storefronts open across the country. A $1 billion strategic response fund was launched to support small and medium-sized firms hit hardest by US tariffs and the end of the de minimis exemption. For many entrepreneurs, this lifeline meant the difference between survival and closure. Thousands of online retailers faced collapse as cross-border sales evaporated. The sudden loss of access to American customers sent shockwaves through the e-commerce sector, forcing many to rethink their business models overnight. Carney's government paused ambitious climate policies, prioritizing economic survival over environmental goals. Projects once seen as the future were put on hold, as the nation's focus shifted to immediate economic stability. The message was clear: Canada would protect its industries by any means necessary, even if it meant rethinking other priorities. The government signaled its willingness to make tough choices to keep the country's economic engine running. The Buy Canadian doctrine was a direct answer to U.S. protectionism, signaling a readiness for a prolonged fight. It was a declaration that Canada would not be bullied or sidelined on the world stage. Ottawa's strategy was to insulate the economy, support vulnerable sectors, and adapt to a new, uncertain reality. Policymakers worked around the clock, crafting responses to challenges that seemed to multiply by the day. The era of easy cross-border trade was over. The familiar flow of goods and people between the two countries slowed to a trickle, changing the economic landscape overnight. Canada was bracing for long economic battle. Uncertainty loomed, and the path forward was anything but clear. The stakes had never been higher. Every decision carried weight, as the nation prepared to weather a storm unlike any it had faced before. The trade war's human cost was immediate and severe. In Canada, factories slowed or shut down, pushing unemployment from 6.9% to 7.1% in a month. Lorry drivers lost routes, and small online businesses saw their U.S. markets vanish overnight. The Strategic Response Fund offered some relief, but for many it was too late. In the U.S., tariffs meant higher prices for everything from timber to cars, squeezing businesses and consumers alike. Construction costs soared, and the auto industry faced chaos as supply chains broke down. Families on both sides felt anxiety and uncertainty as the once stable border became a source of hardship. Business owners hesitated to invest, unsure if the rules would change again. The trade war was no longer abstract. It was reshaping daily life for millions. The cost of conflict was measured in lost jobs, higher prices, and shattered confidence. The crisis exposed deep divisions within Canada. Ontario Premier Doug Ford demanded a tougher stance, even threatening to cut off critical minerals to the U.S. Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith backed Carney's pragmatic approach, arguing for cooperation and positioning Canadian energy as vital to America. Business leaders favored stability and negotiation over escalation. The debate revealed regional rifts, Ontario's manufacturing pain versus Alberta's energy opportunity. Forging a unified national strategy was proving difficult, as leaders balanced local interests with national priorities. Canada's response was as fractured as the relationship it was trying to save. In October, Carney traveled to Washington for a high-stakes meeting with Trump. The tone shifted, less confrontation, more focus on practical sector-specific solutions. Both sides agreed to send negotiating teams to tackle disputes industry by industry, starting with steel and aluminum. The Hope Resolver software's Barasolder Massenson resolved smaller issues to build momentum for tackling the blanket tariffs. No immediate breakthrough, but the diplomatic temperature cooled. Carney called it a rupture, not a transition, but stressed the enduring partnership beneath the friction. The path to resolution was open, but fraught with challenges. Experts like Dr. Emily Vance see the U.S. tariffs as a dramatic break from rules-based trade, replacing predictability with power politics. For decades, North American trade was guided by clear agreements and mutual trust, but the sudden imposition of tariffs has upended that stability. Dr. Vance argues that this shift marks a new era where economic decisions are driven more by political leverage than by established norms. Trade deficits, she explains, are often misunderstood. They reflect broader economic trends, not unfair practices. Many people assume a deficit means one country is losing, but in reality, it can signal strong consumer demand or investment flows. Dr. Vance emphasizes that focusing solely on deficits oversimplifies the complex web of global trade relationships. Targeting Canada with tariffs won't fix the U.S. deficit, it just shifts the pain and distorts both economies. Instead of solving underlying issues, these measures disrupt established supply chains and create uncertainty for businesses on both sides of the border. Canada's Buy Canadian policy is a defensive move, but risks long-term inefficiency if it becomes permanent. While it may offer short-term protection for local industries, it could also lead to higher prices and less innovation if competition is reduced over time. There are no winners in a trade war this deep. Supply chains break, jobs vanish, and trust erodes. The ripple effects can be felt across entire communities, as factories close and workers struggle to find new opportunities. The greatest damage may be to the predictability that once defined North American trade. Without reliable rules, companies hesitate to invest, and long-term planning becomes nearly impossible. Sector-by-sector deals are a start, but they can't restore the lost stability. Piecemeal agreements may address immediate concerns, but they fall short of rebuilding the broad confidence that businesses and workers need. Rebuilding trust will be a monumental task. It requires not just new agreements, but a renewed commitment to fairness, transparency, and cooperation among all parties involved. The continent's economic future depends on whether leaders can move beyond short-term tactics. Only by prioritizing long-term prosperity and shared growth can North America regain its footing in the global economy. The world is watching to see if cooperation or conflict will define the next chapter. The choices made now will echo for generations, shaping not just economies, but the very fabric of international relationships. The US-Canada relationship has been fundamentally altered, with economic and political scars that won't heal quickly. The Trump-Carney meeting opened a door, but real progress depends on the success of sector-specific negotiations. Both economies remain deeply intertwined. Prolonged conflict will only bring mutual harm. The crisis is a warning. Alliances can fracture quickly when national interests shift. The outcome will shape global trade, signaling whether cooperation or confrontation will prevail. Citizens must stay informed. Their livelihoods depend on the choices made in the coming months. The story isn't over. The future of North America's partnership hangs in the balance. Its fate rests on the wisdom and pragmatism of leaders on both sides of the border.